Story 1. In my teens and early 20s, my best friend and I used to have lots of sleepovers. His mom worked the night shift as a nurse, and his little brother usually stayed in his room and went to bed early, so we had the house for ourselves. We'd cook, eat dinner together, watch TV, and especially talk a lot. We also had a tradition that we called night walks. Always around 11 p.m. or midnight, we'd leave the house and go for a long walk, 2-3 hours. It was especially nice in the summer because the air was warm, but there was a coolish breeze and the fields and pastures smelled amazing. There was one particular route we walked very often. Towards the end of it, there was a big forest that we had to cross, and when we emerged from it, we were on a hill that overlooked the city. There was a bench, and sometimes we sat down to enjoy the silence and the distant lights and to relax a bit before going downhill and home again. One time we did exactly this. Walking through the forest was always a bit scary in the middle of the night, so once we got out, my friend suggested resting on that bench for a few minutes. We left the trail, walked 20 miles across a meadow, and finally got to the bench. The bench was located in a place where it was surrounded by trees and bushes, except in the front where you had a great view. We sat there for maybe 20-25 minutes, had a smoke, and just talked about random stuff like space and philosophy. At one point, my friend remarked that he was getting cold because this happened in late fall, October or November. So we decided to get going and walk home again. When we were almost back to the trail, my friend asked me if I had brought the lighter. I told him that I thought he had picked it up. We turned around and went back to the bench. For a while, we just kind of touched around on the wooden surface but couldn't find it. Since this spot was mostly surrounded by trees, it was very dark. My friend took out his phone and turned on the flashlight to find the lighter. He waved the flashlight around, and that's when we saw him. A guy was sitting right behind the bench, like maybe 2 meters 6 feet. He was completely dressed in black and sat there, motionless, on the cold, wet ground, just staring at us. We hadn't heard any noise, so he must have sat there the entire time while we were sitting on the bench, just staring at the back of our heads. That alone is super creepy to think about still today. Of course, my friend and I both got really startled, and my friend said something like, "Holy shit, man, you almost gave us a heart attack, haha. What the hell are you doing there?" But the guy didn't respond to anything. For a while, we just stared at him confused, and he stared back at us. Then I asked, "Why are you sitting there on the ground?" No response. My friend asked, "Are you all right?" Still no response. It was a really surreal situation, but something about it didn't feel good. I can't say what, but something about that guy gave me a really bad feeling in my stomach. My friend later told me that he had felt the same way. Suddenly the guy got up and began to walk towards us. I said, what's happening?" And now the guy answered, but all he said was, "Yeah." As he walked around the bench to come towards us, I felt my friend's hand grab my coat and pull me backwards. He quietly said, "Let's get the fuck out of here, man." We walked a few steps backwards because we didn't want to turn our back on the guy. Then we turned around, ran back to the trail and another 100 meters. When we turned around, we were relieved to see the guy hadn't come after us, but we still walked home as quickly as possible. To this day, I don't know why the hell that guy was sitting there, who he was, why he was silently staring at us for almost half an hour, what he planned to do when he got up and walked towards us, etc. All I can say is that my gut feeling tells me it was the right decision to run away rather than wait to find out. Story 2. When my grandparents passed away, my family moved into their house to help take care of my uncle, who was slightly special needs and had lived there his whole life. I got a lot of creepy vibes in that house and had a lot of nightmares while living there. One evening, I had the worst nightmare ever that was super realistic. Towards the end of the dream, I saw the scariest demon smiling at me with the blackest black eyes, or lack of, more like emptiness. Hundreds of razor-sharp teeth curled into a smile, and strange, cracked white skin almost like bone. The demon somehow conveyed to me that he was going to murder me just by smiling at me. This nightmare made me not want to sleep for weeks out of fear of seeing this thing again. I did not tell my family about this dream. I did not get along with this uncle who we lived with, and I rarely spoke to him unless completely necessary. The next day after that nightmare, he asked me a question. He said, "Hey, do you still have that app on your phone?" The app he was referring to was some stupid phone app for reading EMF. I downloaded the app just for shits and giggles a few weeks prior because, as I said, the house was creepy, and I tried to see if I could pick up any messages from ghosts or demons in the home. I told him, yeah, I still have it. Why? He said, oh, I was just wondering because last night I saw something standing at my doorway. And then proceeded to describe the exact demon from my nightmare. I was so freaked out I don't even think I properly responded to him. I told my family about this, and they agreed that something was in the house. None of us slept well the rest of our time there. Luckily, we didn't live in that house for very long before selling it. Sometimes I still think about that demon from my dream and hope I never encounter that smile again. Also, there's no way my uncle could have known what I dreamt because, like I said, I didn't tell my family about the dream. I fully believe that he saw the same demon in person that I saw in my nightmare. Story 3. 2 important notes to make before the creepy instance. 1. We lock our 3 cats out of our bedroom at night because they get loud and annoying when they want attention, to the point that they wake up our baby. The baby sleeps in her crib in our room. We always do a head count before bed to make sure that they're all out of the bedroom to save us from getting back up to kick one out. 2. Once in a while, one of the cats will slip into our bedroom closet in the daytime when we open the door to grab a shirt or something, and they'll get locked in until we hear them scratching, crying, banging against the inside of the closet door. Scary event. One night when my spouse and I were in bed and about to fall asleep, we heard something banging against our closet door. I asked him if he did the head count before coming to bed, and he confirmed that he did and could have sworn all 3 cats were in the living room. We're both immediately kind of creeped out. My spouse gets out of bed and opens the closet door. Nothing is there. He leaves the bedroom to check the rest of our apartment, and all the cats are curled up together on the living room couch. He returns and checks the closet again, just in case we mysteriously got a rat or something. But there was nothing there. After he came back to bed, we cuddled up and were about to fall asleep again, only to be jolted up by a louder, longer banging against the closet door. At that point, we're both ready to shit ourselves. We both get up and thoroughly search the closet together. There's nothing. I get the baby back to sleep. The banging was so loud it woke her up. And we get back to bed practically intertwined because we're creeped out, but we're also so exhausted that we start to fall asleep again. But of course, what happens once again as we're just about to fall asleep? More banging against the closet door. It's a little lighter this time, but now the doorknob is rattling too. Neither my spouse nor I move. I whisper to him, should we just stay in bed and hope for the best? Out of pure exhaustion, he said yes. Despite being scared, I'm still beyond tired, and in my sleepy haze, I look towards our closet and sternly whisper, this needs to stop now. We are tired, and we're going to sleep. After that, we fell asleep, and there were no more disturbances. There hasn't been any major activity since then either. Some occasional odd sounds and concerning shadows out of the corners of our eyes, but nothing major like that night. Story 4. When my friend and I were 17, we used to work in a Pizza Hut together. We were closing up one weekend, so it was about 11:30 p.m. by the time we shut down and were ready to lock up. When we walked out to her car, an old lady was sitting in the front passenger seat. My friend opened the driver's door and asked the old lady before getting in, "Can I help you?" The old lady said, "I just need a ride home." So we tell her that we just have to go back inside and call our moms to tell her we'll be late. We go back inside the store, lock the door, and call the police. Within 10 minutes, the police are there arresting her. Turns out it was a 47-year-old man dressed up as an old lady. They found drugs and a knife on his body. Story 5. When I was about 13, I and a friend were walking to a middle school dance. I lived right across the street from the school. From my house, there was about a 50-meter sidewalk to it from the main road. Anyway, as we're standing at the traffic light waiting for our turn, I noticed a man in a van and a person in another car yelling at each other. I'm 100% sure I saw the man in the van wave a gun at the person. So he pulls up to the light and is waiting. He calls to me and my friend says he needs directions. Who to ask 13-year-olds for directions? I pull my friend's arm and tell her we need to leave. We started walking back towards my house away from the guy, and he got out, left the van right there at the light. My friend and I take off, full tilt, make it halfway down the path before ducking into some side bushes. We're sitting there with our hands pressed over our mouths while trying to be as still and small as possible. I'm trembling, and can hear my heart pounding in my ear. The man stands at the end of the walkway staring down towards my house. Luckily, there are quite a few houses along the block, so it would have been impossible to tell which one we ducked into, clear as day. In his hand at his hip is a gun. He finally leaves, and my friend and I run back to my house to call my mom and the cops. I refused to walk to school after that. Story 6. I was walking to school one day like usual, and this van passed me just as I got to the end of my driveway and was about to step onto the road to cross it. I remember two guys in front who were both staring at me. A white van with a blue stripe that ran horizontally around the middle of it, but then they turned the corner and sped off down the road. I was a little unnerved, but crossed the street and went down the same road they'd sped off down. I saw them further down, turning the corner up ahead at what was kind of a crossroad. A few minutes later, the van was behind me and slowing down to match my pace. They'd circled the entire block just to get behind me. I didn't even think, just reacted on pure instinct and ran for my mate's house a few doors down, praying they hadn't left for school yet. I can still remember running down their driveway and just body slamming the back of their car in absolute fear. Luckily, they hadn't started reversing yet. They drove me to school, cops got called, as did my mom, and the cops left thinking I was just overly hysterical and that they probably weren't after me. However, not even a week later, a friend of mine was nearly grabbed from her letterbox 2 streets away by a van matching the same description. For some reason, to this day, no one believes that I was possibly about to be kidnapped. Despite believing my friend's story, neither of us had adults who saw the van, and both of us ran for a trusted adult, yet when she reported it to the cops, they put an alert out. Occasionally I'll see a van with that exact marking, the same blue stripe, and have to remind myself that it was nearly 30 years ago this happened. Story 7. Used to dispatch our call take 911 in a moderately sized city. Was working overnights once, and we started getting tons of calls about UFOs over the area. It was a weeknight in summer, and lots of people out walking or drinking or whatever were seeing this thing. We probably took 100-ish calls about them. For reference, I might handle 300 or 400 calls myself on a shift, and as the supervisor of that rotation, I took over trying to resolve it so everybody could focus on the typical stuff. We had a hot phone to the airport ATC for air emergencies. Got to use that once for a plane crash. That was fucking terrifying. And they had absolutely no idea about what was going on and actively resisted getting involved. A little while later, got a hold of an FAA hotline, and they definitely had a UFO policy, but were only interested in taking info. They didn't disseminate anything. Talking to them felt like an interrogation, and I left my badge number instead of my name. Eventually got a hold of a duty officer at an Air Force base relatively close by. He told me they were aware of the situation, they were monitoring it, and to consider it a closed issue. The whole thing was a trip. Definitely got vibes like I was an extra in the opening of Independence Day. This was before the days of neighborhood Facebook groups or Yak Yak. The local radio stations had tons of pictures up on their websites for a while afterward. Story 8. I came home once from school when I was about 15-16 on a dark Friday night. It was winter at the time, so it started to get dark quite early. I was home alone when I arrived. My parents always got home late from work, and my brother had football practice every Friday after school. The first thing I do when I get home is change to my PJs in my bedroom, which is located on the upper floor of the house. My bedroom sits directly above the kitchen. I eventually heard the kitchen door close suddenly, not violently or anything, just normally. In this case, it's the door that leads to the exterior back part of the house, and initially did not think anything of it. I knew it was this specific door in question, as it makes quite a distinctive sound. I remember thinking it was either my brother who had possibly arrived early, or my grandma, who tended to walk into our house and then call for either me or my brother sometimes. Eventually, I started to get weirded out when I couldn't hear anyone moving or saying anything. So I step out of my bedroom and call for both my brother and grandma at the top of the stairs. Nobody answered back, and I still couldn't hear anything. Weird. I start to slowly walk downstairs and then stop halfway through, and I'm now facing the steps that lead to the living room. The kitchen is to the left. Suddenly I started to hear what sounded like heavy breathing, like someone had just run a marathon and was extremely tired. It seemed to be coming from my left, so that meant in the kitchen. I was honestly completely unsure if it was my brain making these noises up in my head, as I was already feeling a little creeped out before I started walking down the stairs. I stood frozen for probably a minute or two, just trying to decipher this supposed breathing I could hear. Eventually, it stops. Being now completely creeped out, I head back upstairs, genuinely concerned someone was in the house. I grab a random object in my room to use as self-defense, just in case I end up coming across an intruder. Ridiculously, I think I ended up picking my bedside lamp as a weapon, can't remember for sure. I somehow gained the courage to go downstairs. Don't ask me how, as I'm such a chicken when it comes to creepy situations like this. I check out the living room and toilet, nothing out of the ordinary. I step into the kitchen, but nothing either, nothing that could indicate someone had possibly been there. The only weird thing was that the kitchen door I mentioned was unlocked. My parents, my brother, and I usually close both that door and the front door when we leave the house, but clearly, someone had forgotten to lock it. The thing is, since it had been left open, I couldn't rule out the possibility that someone might have actually been in the house, even for just a few minutes. It's still something that creeps me out to this day, as I have no explanation for what I heard. Story 9. I moved into a shared house and my housemate told me half the house had burned down and been rebuilt, and the ghost of the old man who died in the fire visited them. I never had any experience of the old man, but when half asleep I'd very clearly feel a cat or two jump onto my bed, settle down, and purr. It happened often. It was quite chilled out and I didn't mind. I would hear the distinctive thump of a cat jumping off the bed from time to time, but there was never a physical cat there. Once in that house, but in a different bedroom, I had a terrifying lucid dream in which a possum cat-like hand claw was coming up from inside of my bed, clawing my thigh. It hurt so much I thought I might be gouging myself in my sleep, but woke up unharmed. Months later, I moved out and met the landlord, who lived a few doors down, to return keys, etc. I said something like, "Must have been scary when the house burned down and killed the owner. Were they living here at the time?" He said, "Oh no, the owner was fine, he got out, but he had about a dozen cats and several of them died in the fire." I'm pretty sure I was sharing my bed with ghost cats. Not sure what the story was with the dream, but I've had a couple of lucid dreams in my time, and they have always been incredibly scary. Story 10. I was at an internal work event, party at a fancy hotel in a different state. It was 80s themed. I started talking to some dude. I barely knew anyone there, so I was trying to network, and he told me he didn't work for my company. Okay, no worries. I make a joke about free food. He stares me straight in the eye and picks up one of my French fries off my plate, dips it in ketchup and eats it without saying a word. I kind of freaked out and dropped the food in the trash and just walked out of the room and decided not to think about it. A few minutes later, there he was, staring at me. I changed rooms again. I'm short, so I hid behind people and pretended to talk to people I kind of recognized from my home office. He follows me, and every few minutes I see him. I finally got the courage to approach a woman I knew the name of from some meetings and seeing her around the office. When I asked if the party had any kind of security, she immediately asked if it was about the dude in the blue jacket and white hat. Apparently she'd noticed him staring at me creepily, so I didn't have to try and convince anyone. Security took him away, and everyone moved on, but I was scared and paranoid for the rest of the business trip. Story 11. When I was about 10, I was walking around the neighborhood with a few girls that were a couple years older than me, who I did not know very well. They were the neighborhood cool girls in my mind, and I was tagging along. After a while, we noticed a car slow down behind us, and the driver was staring hard. We moved a little faster, and he kept pace, so we took off running. It was a huge neighborhood, and he was persistent. At one point, he even threw the car into the park and started to get out. Thankfully, we were faster. We dipped through shortcuts and ran through yards, but he knew the neighborhood well. To my adrenaline-fueled child's mind, we ran for an eternity. We finally got to one girl's house, but she lived with her grandmother, who had a strict one friend allowed in the house policy, apparently regardless of an attempted kidnapping. So 2 girls went inside, and 2 other girls and myself had to get to the other side of the neighborhood. We had gotten a couple of streets over when we saw him again and took off running. He was alert and still persistent. Just as I was coming to terms with never seeing my family again, one of the other girls waved down a minivan, and it was her mom. She drove me home, and I got grounded for taking a ride with a stranger. My mom still doesn't believe me to this day. Story 12. In 1996, I was living in a northern Canadian town, working on the oil rigs as a low-level laborer. I was 20, just starting out in couch surfing, when a friend offered me a windowless basement room in his mom's house, in an unfinished basement. His mom was on disability, and he and his brothers sort of ran the house. I set up down there with a second-hand mattress, a little TV, and a fan. I had always considered myself a tough guy, partied a lot, fights, stupid macho bullshit like that, so I wasn't a squeamish young man. Well, after a little while living in that room, I started hearing things. Not external groaning or banging or the house shifting or anything like that. What I was hearing was a soft, malevolent chuckling in my ear, like someone whispering laughter. Over and over again. I thought I was going crazy. There was a bookshelf in there, and I had a bunch of favorite books I packed around, and they kept falling off the shelf. I'd go up to use the bathroom upstairs and come down. No one had been down there, and my books were on the floor. It got so bad, the laughing sound in my ear, that one night I, as a big tough guy, went upstairs and asked my friend if I could sleep on the floor in his room. I remember being surprised because he didn't make fun of me. This was a town where a good time was going to strip club and then beating the shit out of someone outside in the snow. The next day he said, Brent couldn't sleep down there either, he moved out pretty quick. Brent was his cousin, a guy I knew, casually. So I went to find him. He was always on Gyno Row at the strip club on his days off. He looked at me with dead eyes and said, yeah man, that room is fucking haunted. I only went back in that room to move my shit out, and ended up sharing a place in a trailer park with another buddy.